Everything had been survived by Howard Cosell. When the world turned against Muhammad Ali, he stood up for him. He was threatened with death because he advocated for civil rights. For decades, he fought against irate fans and network bosses. He was impervious to touch. Then everything fell apart one September evening. The largest controversy in broadcasting history began with a single statement during a football game. What did he remark that was so startling that it abruptly put an end to a legendary career? Shaw. You'll be shocked by the response, especially when you find out who stood up for him. On March 25, 1918, Howard Cosell was born, Howard William Cohen, in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. His parents were Jewish immigrants who came to America in search of a better life after fleeing persecution in Eastern Europe. Isidore, his father, was an accountant. Nellie, his mother, remained at home. Their conviction that education was the sole means of escaping adversity influenced Howard's future. The family's time in North Carolina was brief. They relocated to Brooklyn, New York, prior to Howard's third birthday. Brooklyn was packed, noisy, and teeming with immigrants attempting to start over. Howard's piercing tongue and unwavering confidence developed there. Howard used words to fight while other children used fists. He never backs down from a verbal altercation, read books, and repeated them on the playground. He was intelligent, arrogant, and always prepared to make a return. His ego was already developing and continued to grow. Howard began to realize the importance of individuality as he grew older. He made a personal and professional choice in the late 1930s while attending NYU for law school. His last name was changed from Cohen to Cosell. He said that before it was altered at Ellis Island, it was derived from his grandfather's original Polish name. Family pride wasn't the only reason for the name change. Additionally, it was about making a statement in an area where a Jewish name can be a hindrance. Cosell had no desire to fit in. He wished to leave a lasting impression. Howard became the sports editor of the school newspaper while attending Alexander Hamilton High School in Brooklyn. He didn't write fluff even back then. His opinions were forthright and incisive. He was despised by certain students. He was admired by several educators. However, he could not be ignored. He didn't hesitate to criticize subpar play or coaching. He was already behaving like the gruff broadcaster he would grow up to be at the age of 16. Cosell graduated from NYU with a law degree and a bachelor's degree in English literature by the age of 21. It wasn't common. He was quick, intelligent, and motivated. However, success was insufficient. He wanted more than simply a steady job. He wanted a voice, notoriety, and influence. His parents were pleased. However, parents were unable to fully comprehend the fire that was motivating their kid. Cosell enlisted in the U.S. military when World War II started. Army. From 1942 to 1945, he was a Transportation Corps major at the port of embarkation in New York. The obligation was enormous. He assisted in planning the transatlantic transport of troops and supplies. Entire missions could be delayed by a single error. Cosell, however, prospered. He became one of the youngest officers in his position after earning his rank at a young age. He was composed, effective, and capable of finishing tasks. That position demonstrated his ability to manage authority and pressure. Howard met WAC Sergeant Corporal Mary Edith Emmy Abrams while he was stationed in New York. Officers were not allowed to date enlisted personnel at the time. Cosell, however, was unconcerned. He immediately approached a commander and requested authorization. It took guts and paperwork to make the move. However, the general gave his approval. Despite the skepticism of her Orthodox Presbyterian family, Howard and Emmy continued to date. Even when it came to love, Cosell never let the restrictions stop him. In 1944, while he was still in the Army, they were married. The wedding took place in the courtroom of a Brooklyn judge. After 46 years of marriage, Emmy passed away in 1990. Cosell returned to New York and established a legal business in Manhattan following the conclusion of the war. He soon amassed a clientele that included well-known people like Willie Mays, the baseball star. He made between $25,000 and $30,000 annually, which was a substantial sum at the time. However, something was already accumulating within him. He felt imprisoned even as a lawyer. It wasn't fun for him. He would pace his office while recounting fictitious sporting events or making speeches to George. Friends found it odd. He believed it was essential. He once said to a journalist that he was not good enough at being mediocre to make it in the industry. Something louder, something public, something more was what he needed. And he got it from sports radio. Howard Cosell's first significant break came in 1953. He received an invitation from ABC Radio's Hal Neal to present a brief program on WABC in New York. The concept was straightforward. Major League Baseball players were interviewed by Little League children. Cosell consented despite not receiving payment. He continued to practice law during the day and did the radio show as a side gig. He didn't make a dime from it for nearly 3 years. He didn't care, though. For him, it was an entrance. Despite the show's lightheartedness and playfulness, Cosell began to learn more. There was one particularly memorable occasion. On radio, Yankees outfielder Hank Bauer made light of his manager, Casey Stengel. That minor error turned into a news story. Cosell seen the potency of spontaneous, genuine dialogue. He came to the realization that people will frequently tell the truth if you just let them speak. That stayed with him. Later, Cosell was challenged by ABC President Robert Pauley to get a sponsor for a brand new sports feature. Cosell accepted the challenge. After securing a sponsor, he started speaking of sports. That program would run for decades. Cosell's diligence and keen intuition were paying dividends. He was no longer only hosting. He was beginning to influence sports journalism. Cosell stopped playing it safe by 1956. He transitioned from doing occasional interviews to working as an ABC radio sports reporter full-time. Back then, the majority of sportscasters were kind. They steered clear of anything too sensitive or contentious and asked simple questions. Cosell, however, came in full force. He asked a player directly in an early interview if he shot too much, and his teammates avoided passing to him. Individuals weren't accustomed to that. He persisted in pushing. He paid close attention to each response and always followed up if he suspected that something was being withheld. That style was despised by some. It was respected by others. Because they trusted Cosell, athletes like Tommy Smith, who delivered the Black Power salute during the 1968 Olympics, choose him for interviews. They were certain that he would respect their opinions and allow them to express themselves freely. That trust was important. Cosell gained notoriety for one item over time. He was honest. He did not behave in a supportive manner. He wasn't there to defend anyone's reputation or to compliment athletes. He pointed out misbehavior. Poor performance was criticized by him. Despite being advised to keep to sports, he discussed politics, race, and war. He was adored by some fans. He was despised by others. However, he was not disregarded. He was dubbed the most despised person in sports and the voice of American sports media. Wow. His distinct tone and piercing rhythm made his voice unique. People still remember Howard Cosell's quote, "This is Howard Cosell telling it like it is." And then he had his relationship with Muhammad Ali. He was known as Cassius Clay in 1964. However, the majority of people didn't accept his new name when he came forth and announced it to the public. Newspapers continued to refer to him as Clay. TV hosts refrained from mentioning Ali. The retaliation was swift and severe. However, one man, Howard Cosell, rose to his feet and called out his name. Cosell referred to him on national television as Muhammad Ali. Ollie. Millions of people were upset, but he didn't care. Hate letters flooded his mailbox, but he didn't care. Cosell wasn't going to back down because he thought Ali had the right to be himself. He understood what being an outsider meant. As a Brooklyn-born Jewish child who had experienced bullying due to his heritage, Cosell was aware of discrimination. For this reason, he supported Ali despite the fact that it endangered his own career. "It's his name," he said, "and I'll call him whatever he wants." Everything changed with just one choice. It was more than just boxing. It was about courage, respect, and identity. Ali and Cosell were instantly connected by a relationship that went beyond sports. Then came 1967. There was a war going on in Vietnam. Thousands of young guys were being drafted. Muhammad Ali replied no, refusing to take part in a conflict in which he had no faith. It was against his faith, he stated, and he wouldn't murder anyone who hadn't hurt him. The penalty came quickly. His boxing license was revoked. He was expelled from the organization. They took away his title. The media largely turned against him. They labeled him a traitor and a coward. Cosell, however, didn't. On air, he denounced the government's actions as unlawful and inhumane. He claimed that punishing Ali for his views was wrong. The sponsors threatened to remove their advertisements. Networks advised him to remain silent. Cosell, however, did not recoil. No one else would say what he did. He noticed the unfair treatment. Wealthy white draft dodgers were not held accountable. However, Ali was set as an example since he was young, black, and fearless. Cosell pointed it up quite clearly. The hate letter came back again. However, it simply made their friendship stronger this time. They were no longer merely boxers and broadcasters. Two men were standing in the face of a storm. The magic they produced on screen came next. Cosell illuminated television screens for almost 2 decades. It was like watching boxing matches throughout their interviews. For amusement, Ali would make fun of Cosell's hairpiece, chuckle at his lofty rhetoric, and swear to knock him out. Cosell's eyes would roll, respond sarcastically, and challenge Ali on all points. They constantly kept the audience interested by arguing, laughing, and making fun of one another. It was more than just amusement. It was a brutally honest but always polite discussion between equals. Ali once yelled, "You should be arrested for air pollution every time you open your mouth." Cosell replied, "You'd still be in poverty if I hadn't made you." It was bold, funny, raw. But beneath the jokes, they admired each other. They trusted each other. They knew the cameras couldn't fake that kind of bond. When Ali was banned from boxing and almost forgotten by the world, Cosell didn't forget. While others turned their backs, Cosell opened his studio doors. He kept inviting Ali on air. They talked about his faith, his decision to stay out of the war, his dreams, his fears. In one interview at the Houston Astrodome, you could see the sweat on Ali's face after a hard workout. But Cosell didn't ask about the fight. He asked about the man, and people listened. Ali wasn't a villain anymore. He was a human being, and Cosell helped make that happen. Then came the night in 1973. Joe Frazier was in the ring with George Foreman. Millions were watching. Round after round, Frazier hit the canvas, and Cosell's voice rang through TV across the world. 3 simple words shouted 3 times, "Down goes Frazier, down goes Frazier, down goes Frazier." It was raw emotion. It was disbelief, and it became the most famous call in boxing history. People still quote it, still laugh about it, and still feel it. That night, Cosell didn't just narrate a fight. He captured a moment in time, a moment that proved sport wasn't just about who won. It was about what we felt watching it. And no one made us feel like Cosell did. Ali would later say that Cosell gave him a voice when no one else would listen. Cosell once said that Ali helped him become more than just a broadcaster. He became part of the story. Together, they pushed America to confront race, religion, war, and identity. Not with anger, but with words, with dignity, and with courage. In 1970, ABC executive Roone Arledge made a decision that changed American television forever. He hired Howard Cosell to be part of the new Monday Night Football broadcast team. This was a complete gamble. Cosell wasn't a former football player. He wasn't even a traditional sports broadcaster. He was loud, opinionated, and had a voice that demanded attention. Arledge didn't want bland commentary. He wanted sparks, and that's exactly what Cosell brought. The NFL wasn't happy. For years, the league had insisted on approving who sat in the broadcast booth. Arledge said no. He stood firm, refusing to let the league control his team. And it paid off. Ratings jumped 50% in that first season. Viewers were hooked, not just on football, but on the show around the game. The following year, in 1971, Arledge made another bold move. He replaced respected announcer Keith Jackson with Frank Gifford. Gifford had never done play-by-play before, but he was a football star with a calm, likable presence. Arledge wasn't looking for experience. He was building a trio. Cosell brought the drama. Don Meredith added humor. And now Gifford would balance them out. It worked. Ratings soared again. ABC was charging $65,000 for a single ad minute during the game. A massive sum for the time. This trio didn't just change football coverage. They redefined what live sports could be on television. They weren't just announcers. They were part of the show. What kept people watching wasn't just the games. It was the sparks flying between Cosell and Meredith. Cosell's sharp tone and Meredith's relaxed humor created a tension that was impossible to ignore. They argued on air, they teased each other. Once in 1974, they were both suspected of being a little drunk on live TV. The audience didn't care. They loved it. People started picking sides. Team Cosell or Team Meredith? Bars and living rooms buzzed with debate, and Arledge encouraged it. He knew conflict made good television. The show didn't feel scripted. It felt real, and that made it unforgettable. Cosell also had a voice that turned simple moments into events. One phrase in particular became iconic. He could go all the way. It was dramatic. It was slow. It was pure Cosell. He didn't just describe the action. He turned it into a story. Sometimes he'd even tell personal details about a player's life before delivering the line. It wasn't just a touchdown. Touchdown. It was a triumph. The phrase became so popular that other broadcasters started copying it. Chris Berman made it part of his act on ESPN. Today, the phrase still shows up in highlight reels and comedy sketches. It wasn't just a catchphrase. It was a symbol of how Cosell brought entertainment into the booth, but Cosell wasn't loved by everyone. His public feud with sports columnist Dick Young became legendary. Young called him names in print, like Howie the Fraud, and even tried to sabotage his interviews by shouting obscenities during tapings. It was personal, it was loud, and it was symbolic. Young represented the old world of newspapers. Cosell was the face of television. They weren't just fighting each other, they were fighting for the future of sports media. Cosell fired back just as hard, calling Young a right-wing cultural illiterate. Their war of words played out in columns, on air, and even in locker rooms. It wasn't just ego. It was a clash between two worlds that were quickly moving in different directions. Cosell also had friction with fellow broadcasters. One of them was Chris Economaki, a legend in motorsports coverage. Economaki once said Cosell had the biggest ego he'd ever seen. Their conflict wasn't about ratings, it was personal. Cosell held grudges. After Economaki made a minor mistake during an interview, Cosell brought it up again and again. Even a simple introduction at a Christmas party set him off. He didn't forget slights, no matter how small, and people around him noticed. Working with Cosell could be exhausting, but his presence always drew attention. That mix of brilliance and conflict became part of his mystique. Another famous critic was Jimmy Cannon. He took aim at Cosell in print, mocking his toupee and his name change from Cohen to Cosell. Cannon didn't just attack the broadcaster, he questioned the man himself. He called Cosell fake, saying he was all performance. He even joked that if Cosell were a sport, he'd be roller derby. The insult stuck. Cosell's look and voice made him a target for parody, but that didn't stop him. In fact, it made him even more famous. Critics fueled his legend. He was controversial, he was combative, and he didn't mind. In fact, Cosell openly criticized the trend of hiring former athletes as broadcasters. He called it jokocracy. He believed the job should go to people who trained for it, not just people who played the game. That put him at odds with co-hosts like Gifford and Meredith. He didn't hide his opinion. He said ex-players lacked insight and depth. It was a risky stance. Viewers like seeing familiar faces, but Cosell stuck to his view. He believed sports commentary should be thoughtful and informed, not just casual conversation. His criticism sparked real debate about what sports broadcasting should be. He didn't win many friends with that attitude, but he did make people think. Howard Cosell was loud, proud, and often over the top on television. But behind the scenes, he was a quiet man who didn't want to go anywhere without his wife, Emmy. Her real name was Mary Edith Abrams. They got married in 1944 and stayed together for 46 years. Emmy followed him everywhere, games, events, interviews. People in the industry knew how close they were. Even his daughter said he couldn't function without her. She gave him balance. After she died in 1990, everything changed. His health got worse. His spirit faded. Within a year, he had surgery to remove a tumor. 2 years later, he left broadcasting for good. People who only knew the tough version of Cosell on TV were stunned by how broken he was without her. That side of him, the quiet love, independence, had always been hidden behind the noise. At home, Howard was nothing like the man people saw on camera. The shouting, the arguments, the fast talking. That was all part of the job. In private, he was calm. He was gentle. He had 2 daughters, Jill and Hillary, and he loved reading them poetry from Keats and Shelley. On walks, he recited lines softly. He played card games with neighbors. He rarely raised his voice. Emmy kept him grounded. She was the only person who could calm him down when he got too worked up. Hillary once said he couldn't live without her, and it showed. He was always softer around his grandchildren, too. He was never the mouth that roared at home. Instead, he was thoughtful, humble, and deeply attached to his family. That version of Howard was real, but most people never saw it. While Cosell was building his career, he started drinking. Monday Night Football brought fame and stress, and sometimes too much vodka. On November 23, 1970, in freezing Philadelphia, he drank several martinis before going on air. During the live broadcast, he slurred the word Philadelphia and called it Philadelphia. Then he vomited right on Don Meredith's cowboy boots. He had to leave the booth. Viewers were shocked, but it wasn't the only time. People at ABC said he often drank before, during, and after shows. In 1984, during the baseball playoffs, Al Michaels had enough. He told Cosell to his face, "You're ruining the fucking telecast." It became a serious problem. The network didn't know what to do. Ratings were still high, but Cosell's behavior made him unpredictable. His drinking became part of his legacy, something fans remember as clearly as his voice. Under all the confidence, Cosell was insecure. Deep down, he was afraid people didn't like him. That fear drove him. He fought with co-hosts, challenged sports officials, and argued with executives. But it wasn't always about truth. Sometimes it was about proving he belonged. So, he once said that only Frank Sinatra got more negative press than he did. He constantly asked producers if others were turning against him. He worried about being replaced. The bold opinions and sharp words were often a shield. He needed to be seen. He needed to be respected. And when he wasn't, it cut deep. People thought he was arrogant, but many of his outbursts came from fear, not pride. One of Cosell's most unforgettable moments came on December 8, 1980. During the final minute of a football game between the Dolphins and the Patriots, he got word that John Lennon had been shot and killed outside his apartment in New York. Cosell paused. He didn't want to say it on air. His co-host, Frank Gifford, told him he had to. So Cosell went live. He told millions of viewers it's just a football game, an unspeakable tragedy confirmed to us by ABC News. John Lennon shot twice in the back, dead on arrival. It was quiet after that. People sat frozen in their homes. No one was expecting to hear that kind of news during a game. But it was a moment that showed how powerful television could be. Cosell wasn't just a sports announcer that night. He was the one who told America that one of its most loved voices was gone. On the night of September 5th, 1983, millions of Americans sat in front of their TV watching Monday Night Football. The Dallas Cowboys and Washington Redskins were battling it out, and the atmosphere was electric. But what people remember most about that night had nothing to do with touchdowns or final scores. As Washington wide receiver Alvin Garrett darted through defenders, Howard Cosell made a comment that would end his career. He said, "That little monkey gets loose, doesn't he?" In just 6 words, Cosell sparked a national firestorm. Viewers were stunned. The phones at ABC lit up with complaints. By morning, newspapers and talk shows were tearing the moment apart. Cosell, a giant in sports broadcasting for decades, was suddenly at the center of one of the biggest controversies in television history. Reverend Joseph Lowery, president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, didn't wait to react. He called for a public apology, and he didn't just stop at Cosell. He sent telegrams to ABC executives demanding they take action. Lowery used the moment to highlight a larger issue. He pointed out the contrast between the number of black athletes on the field and the near-total absence of black voices in the broadcast booth. The backlash spread quickly. Radio shows, newspaper editorials, and TV panels exploded with debate. The demand for Cosell's firing grew louder with each passing hour. Cosell tried to control the damage. At first he claimed he hadn't said "little monkey" at all. He said he only remarked that Garrett moved like one and meant it as a compliment to his agility and drive. ABC tried to back him up, saying he wasn't talking about Garrett's appearance but his quickness, but the tapes didn't lie. Journalists replayed the footage and confirmed what viewers had heard. Cosell had said the exact words being denied. This only made things worse. Instead of ending the controversy, the denials turned it into a scandal. Seal's credibility, once rock solid, began to crumble. Under pressure, Seal defended himself. He said, "Little monkey" was a phrase he'd used for years with no racial meaning. He pointed to earlier broadcasts, including a 1972 game where he called white player Mike Adamle a little monkey. In 1982, he used the same term for Glenn Hubbard, another white athlete. He even said he used it affectionately with his grandchildren. Supporters argued that Cosell's track record mattered. He had always spoken up for civil rights. He had defended Muhammad Ali when few others did, but none of that seemed to matter. Context was quickly buried under outrage. Then came a surprise. Some of Cosell's strongest defenders were black athletes and civil rights leaders. Jesse Jackson publicly supported him. Muhammad Ali stood by his side, and Alvin Garrett himself, the man Cosell had been describing, said he didn't find the comment offensive. Garrett explained, "I liked Howard Cosell. I liked Howard Cosell. I didn't feel that it was a demeaning statement." But public opinion had already turned. The media had framed the story as a racial insult, and that version stuck. Even with all the support, Cosell couldn't escape the storm. The controversy took on a life of its own, one that didn't care about past friendships or good intentions. By the end of the 1983 season, Cosell was done. 13 years after helping reinvent Monday Night Football, he stepped away. He called the experience emotionally draining. It wasn't just the scandal that wore him down. He had grown disillusioned with the direction football and television were heading. His departure marked the end of an era. Cosell had once been a fearless voice, unafraid to challenge athletes, coaches, and even the leagues themselves. Now, a single sentence had ended it all. Though he continued on radio until 1992, his presence on TV was never the same. His personal life soon began to fall apart. In 1991, at age 73, he was diagnosed with cancer. Doctors found a tumor in his chest, and he went through surgery that June. At the same time, he was coping with the death of his wife, Emmy, who had been his partner and emotional anchor. Cosell tried to stay active on radio, but it was clear he was fading. By 1992, he retired for good. He spent his final years battling not only cancer, but heart disease, Parkinson's, and several minor strokes. Interviews from that time show a man full of regret. He felt like he had been pushed out before completing the work he started. The same voice that once shaped how America saw sports had gone quiet. The world barely noticed. On April 23, 1995, Howard Cosell died in New York at age 77. The cause was a heart embolism. News of his death brought mixed reactions. Some called him a legend and a pioneer, a man who made sports broadcasting smarter and bolder. Others remembered only the controversies, the arrogance, and the final downfall. There were glowing obituaries and sharp critiques. Some fans mourned, others shrugged. His legacy had been forever changed by that one night in 1983. Even so, the world didn't forget his contributions. In 1993, 2 years before his death, TV Guide named him the all-time best sportscaster. That same year, he entered the International Jewish Sports Hall of Fame. In 1994, he was inducted into the Television Hall of Fame, although he was too ill to attend. More honors followed. In 1996, he received a posthumous Sports Emmy for Lifetime Achievement. He was also added to the American Sportscasters Hall of Fame and later the International Boxing Hall of Fame. These awards were a final recognition that despite the scandal, Cosell had changed the game forever.